Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of our convocation this year. This is only my second year at Maine, Augusta, and I feel so blessed to have landed here in this good company, especially in these unusually trying times. One thing that has most impressed me about the UMA community overall has been the commitment to kindness, respect, and a sincere interest in putting the needs of students first. And those are qualities that I think are more essential now than ever. COVID-19 has challenged me deeply this year, as I'm sure it has for all of us. We've seen outbreaks of good sense in reaction, and also outbreaks of hysteria and fear. And we have done all that while sometimes also homeschooling our children and navigating the mental stresses of all of these unknowns. On the other hand, the outbreaks of sustained protests in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor has shown me also that my fellow Americans are still ready to stand strong in their beliefs and to protest in outbreaks against racial injustice. These outbreaks of protests are simply the latest in a long series of hard-fought efforts to fight back against white supremacy and to demand true equality for all people and for a celebration of the rich diversity all around us. To achieve that, I think, from my perspective, surprise, that I think that we need to learn the lessons of history, right? To take history classes, and to truly acknowledge and begin to wrestle with the inequalities that are baked into our system. This is a time for all of us, myself included, to look at these outbreaks and examine them from a place of humble self-reflection. I myself have been humbled many times since March, and that continues. And while that has not exactly been a fun experience, it has also helped me grow as an educator and as a person. I taught a class on the history of slavery and emancipation at the Maine State Prison this summer. That meant that as Black Lives Matter protests were in full swing, I found myself immersed in a profound learning experience alongside my students. I chose books for them to read that I myself had never read, and was ashamed and openly acknowledged to them that I could have a PhD in US history and still have such embarrassing gaps in my own knowledge about Black history. That speaks, I think, to a fundamental flaw in our education system. The way hard facts about segregation and racial violence have too often been ignored, minimized, or treated as already solved. I would suggest that history is not a fairy tale, and it is not, certainly not a story always of unity and national greatness. Instead, it is much more complicated than that, much more messy, much more interesting, and I think much more useful. So as a historian, it saddens me to see this rich and complex American history being distorted and simplified by our recent executive order. The reality, though, is that America was founded on principles of freedom and, at the same time, realities of oppression. And that this new America was founded also on dissent and a lot of troublemaking. In the 1770s, the Sons of Liberty, for example, were troublemakers who rioted, who toppled statues in the streets, and who demanded that their individual rights be respected. At the same time, the reality of slavery and white supremacy was barely acknowledged in our founding documents. And that is a founding conflict in our country, and one that the founding fathers mainly tried to ignore. Quoting historian Nathan Huggins on this, quote, "They preferred to avoid the deforming mirror of truth. If the evil were not mentioned or seen, it would be as if it was not there at all. Nothing so embarrassing, however, nothing so fundamentally contradictory to the social ethos can be kept at a discreet distance for long. It will intrude, and rudely. End of quote. So in other words, the truth, as we've all seen, will come out in outbreaks of protests because the roots of those problems continue to remain unaddressed. Even the history of very famous civil rights leaders, such as Martin Luther King, is sometimes distorted to make him seem unthreatening and therefore historically acceptable. However, if you actually picked up a newspaper or magazine from the 1960s, it'd be very easy for you to find evidence that Martin Luther King was in fact widely vilified in his own time. He was described as a violent, psychopathic troublemaker by many. Also, while Martin Luther King dreamed of a future of equality, he also could be blunt in his assessment of the realities of American racism. So in a 1967 speech, he stated, quote, "And we must face the hard fact that many Americans would like to have a nation which is a democracy for white Americans, but simultaneously a dictatorship over Black Americans." So when we consider this current moment, I think what we need are outbreaks of honesty, outbreaks of self-reflection, and outbreaks of action based on accurate history of this nation. Are we in a new civil rights era right now? Are Martin Luther King's words still true? And how do we react to that? It is not being negative or unpatriotic to ask these questions. It is simply being accurate. In working toward truth and reconciliation with the history of white supremacy in this country, we must shine a bright light on the truth and have more, not less, active outbreaks of anti-racism and anti-oppression work. To conclude with more words from Martin Luther King, quote, "For those who are telling me to keep my mouth shut, I can't do that. And we must know on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? And vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? If it is, and I think it is, then I encourage us all to think about how we can contribute to creating outbreaks of, as the late Representative John Lewis called it, good trouble. I know we are up to the challenge. Thank you.